So our lovely author mentioned Martin Luther King Jr. Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break Silence. This is a profound piece, I gotta tell you.
Before the end of the war, we were meeting 80% of the French war cost. Even before the French were defeated at Dien Bien Phu, they began to despair.
So anyway, you gotta read it. I'll put the links in there. You can get the transcript to this speech, and you can also listen to it on YouTube. I'll put links. But it's so profound. It's so utterly profound. I'm going to show you a quote from my notes. Well, hello, my friends. Nice to see you. It's chilly here. It's -3, 4 in the evening, and in the daytime, in the morning, it's around 5 to 8 degrees. Then it warms up to about 13. So this house isn't very well insulated. They don't do that in general where I live, unless you live in a much more expensive home. But, a little down jacket and a sweater works well, works wonders. I do cheat and use the electric heater once in a while just to take the chill off. But I try not to use it. So today I got to get something off my chest because, the war grinds on, and you have to deal with people on all sides. Cheerleaders, I call them pom-pom boys. Armchair warriors. Of course, some of the people I read on Medium and Substack and other places are not armchair warriors. They are veterans or journalists in the theater reporting on the war. And I read a variety of perspectives, as I do, which means some people are more objective, just reporting on the war. Other people have a bias towards Russia or towards Ukraine. I steer clear of the mainstream propaganda from the United States because it makes me ill. I can't stand it. And so that's what I want to get off my chest by sharing with you an article that I read on Tom Dispatch this morning. Can the military-industrial complex be tamed? By William J. Astor. He's a serious military-industrial complex guy who now criticizes the military-industrial complex of the United States. The links in the article are brilliant, and so I'm going to walk you through some of them with the hope that you'll look into them. Any shallow understanding of a war, especially one as complex as this one, is tragic, and one can only hope that there's enough of a social shift at scale in the United States, some kind of coming together to make sense of this nonsense, where we can end this insane, constant belligerence, the meddling, the push for war that Uncle Sam is always involved with, everywhere and all the time for decades. And this isn't controversial. There are so many books, so many great articles and studies and academic writing on the subject of the forever wars, or however you want to call it, I don't care. But it's a waste. And even though you have the culture wars, you can't decide who gets what. If we have health care, those people get it too, so I don't want health care. Or, what kind of education are you for? I don't want them to read this book or that book. We sure shouldn't let this be discussed or that be discussed. Whether you're from the far left or right, or whether you're on a spectral middle person like myself, commonsensical, just kind of in the middle somewhere, looking to the extremes for information about the extremes, trying to understand what makes people tick, what forces their opinions, what motivates their thinking, and so on and so forth. We can't afford in this world the kind of nonsense that we've been doing for the last 100 years. You know, the technology's getting too intense. Quantum computing is coming. We have data science and big data and surveillance everywhere, and people are tracked on the internet, and, you know, artificial intelligence, whatever you want to think about these things, if you delve into them deeply. And new weapons systems that are extremely complex, require a global supply chain to produce. They're extremely expensive, and they're extremely dangerous because they're effective. And these things could get way out of hand with hypersonic missiles and with technologies that can bring down the internet and, you know, cyber wars and blackout radar systems and whatever. It all becomes a first strike thing then. So the multipolar trap there is we have to strike first, because if we don't, we're dead, because they're going to strike first. But the meddling is pernicious and disgusting. You know, push for a conflict. And then lo and behold, there is one. It's like being a bully and finally getting your butt kicked, or just bothering somebody so much, giving them such a hard time that it pushes you to a point where you have to react in a violent way, or in a way that you would be ashamed of normally. I'm sick of the cheerleaders. I wish you'd keep your mouth shut, keep your opinions to yourself, because there's another book I just put up on my website, What It's Like to Go to War. This author wrote The Matterhorn. It's a kind of book you should read if you want to understand what young people are going through in Ukraine right now, whether they're Russians or Ukrainians or mercenaries. It's not a good thing. And once there's a failed state in Russia and the U.S. corporations are going in to rebuild Ukraine to make money off of this tragedy, you're going to have a lot of very sick people, mentally ill human beings who went through hell during this war. None of it's good. It doesn't bode well for the future. And we do have more important things to be focusing on and thinking about. Social change, social evolution, however you want to think about it. If you have your perfect king and somehow you wish the whole world would just behave like the imaginary way they might have behaved way back when during his kingdom, and you have some conservative vision where if everybody just behaved properly according to their genetic code, the whole world would be beautiful, or some other social justice warrior type of fantasy or other utopian dreams. Let's be honest with ourselves. We agree on more things than we disagree on, most of us, most of the time. If you sit down with a normal human being and have a conversation face to face, eye to eye, heart to heart, you'll find lots of places where you are just human, where it all makes sense. Yes, I agree with you there, but still I hate the Democrats, or still I'm a nouvelle conservative, right-wing, undercurrent, heterodox dude. Okay, so as I said, I was reading Tom Dispatch this morning. My RSS feed sends me Tom's stuff, and so I read it because I like it. So he usually has an introduction to an article that he's featuring. So in this case, William Astor, war racketeers won't reform themselves, which is a fact. That's basically what the article's about. Then you can see, can the military-industrial complex be tamed? Cutting the Pentagon budget in half would finally force the generals to think. And yep, wouldn't that be true? But will that ever happen? Not if you have been paying attention to the United States of America for the last 50 years, 70 years. So he mentions that he's a card-carrying member of the military-industrial complex, what we call MIC. And he retired in 2005. He was an Air Force man. So here's the biography of the author of the article, William J. Astor. So he was in the Air Force for 20 years, retired in 2005. And now he writes for different publications, most of them leaning left. All of them, it looks like, Truth Out, Alternet, antiwar.com, so that's the way he goes. But don't just write him off because you're a right-leaning person. Think it through. There are things that intersect there that you believe in and he believes in. There's common ground. So he wrote a book, Soldiers' Lives Through History, The Early Modern World, and Hindenburg, Icon of German Militarism, Observing God, Thomas Dick, Evangelicism, and Popular Science in Victorian Britain and America. Wow, I didn't know about that one. 2001. That looks interesting. So he has a BS in mechanical engineering and MA from Johns Hopkins University. The guy's a smart guy. He's a military man, Air Force man. I think you can trust his earnestness, the earnestness of his opinion. And he's still very much a military man. He's the real deal. But, you know, he's saying you don't have to be anti-war to be highly suspicious of U.S. military. They've lied so often, whether in Vietnam or Iraq, Afghanistan, that, you know, you'd have to be asleep or ignorant to not be skeptical of the MIC. Then he mentions Dwight D. Eisenhower and the 1961 farewell address.
Like every other citizen, I wish the new president and all who will labor with him Godspeed. I pray that the coming years will be blessed with peace and prosperity for all. Our people expect their president and the Congress to find essential agreement on issues of great moment, the wise resolution of which will better shape the future of the nation.
So I like to look at all of the hyperlinks. I think that's important when you read an article by somebody who's earnest and responsible, because he's making points referring to things that are important and maybe some things you haven't noticed or seen before. And so it's important to go ahead and look at that. When you're reading a book, you look at the author's notes or his bibliography, her bibliography. Try to figure out where they're coming from, especially if it's nonfiction, of course, right? So he talks about people who write for Tom Dispatch, like Andrew Basovich and Danny Surgeon, William Hartung, these kind of people. Then he mentions Beyond Vietnam by Martin Luther King. You gotta listen to that speech, and you've got to read it, because some things never change. And you can't make a direct comparison between Vietnam and Iraq, 1 or 2, Afghanistan, South America, Central America, meddlings, Africa, Cold War, Ukraine. They're not exactly the same thing, but the meddling, the pushing, the shoving, the ideological background, the business behind it, the racket, it's got a lot of similar overtones and undertones.
For the counter-revolutionary action of American forces in Guatemala, It tells why American helicopters are being used against guerrillas in Cambodia and why American napalm and Green Beret forces have already been active against rebels in Peru. It is with such activity in mind that the words of the late John F. Kennedy come back to haunt us. 5 years ago, he said, "Those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable." Increasingly by choice or by accident, this is the role our nation has taken, the role of those who make peaceful revolution impossible by refusing to give up the privileges and the pleasures that come from the immense profits of overseas investments. I am convinced that if we are to get on the right side of the world revolution, we as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values. We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society, when machines and computers, profit motives and property rights are considered more important than people. The giant triplets of racism, extreme materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. A true revolution of values will soon cause us to question the fairness and justice of many of our past and present policies. On the one hand, we are called to play the Good Samaritan on life's roadside, but that will be only an initial act. One day we must come to see that the whole Jericho road must be transformed so that men and women will not be constantly beaten and robbed as they make their journey on life's highway. True compassion is more than flinging a coin to a beggar. It comes to see that an edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring.
So, this is from my Evernote. I use Evernotes for my work. So this is the Martin Luther King classic, Time to Break the Silence Declaration Against the Vietnam War. And it's just brilliant. I mean, Martin Luther King was an amazing orator and an amazing leader. Not a perfect person, nobody is. But it's a tragedy that that guy was murdered. I'm often thinking, you know, you have good people that come along. They're not perfect. You know, you might disagree with them on various things, or maybe they're not morally the most perfect people in the world, but they're incredible leaders. They're doing good things for people, and they get murdered. And then you have these hustlers and con men and criminals and goofballs and greedy morons that are running the show, playing the game, and they never get hurt. They skate. They're too big to fail. They never get prosecuted. It just seems that way, you know? Epstein goes to jail and mysteriously dies, but after having had a lifetime servicing the players. I don't know the truth behind that story. I don't know that anybody does. Maybe it'll come out in time, but you know what I mean, right? So look at this. Since I am a preacher by calling, I suppose it's not surprising that I have 7 major reasons for bringing Vietnam into the field of my moral vision. There is at the outset a very obvious and most facile connection between the war in Vietnam and the struggle I and others have been waging in America. A few years ago, there was a shining moment in that struggle. It seemed as if there was a real promise of hope for the poor, both black and white, through the poverty program. There were experiments, hopes, new beginnings. Then came the buildup in Vietnam, and I watched this program broken and eviscerated as if it were some idle political plaything of a society gone mad on war. And I knew that that America would never invest the necessary funds or energies in rehabilitation of its poor, so long as adventures like Vietnam continued to draw men and skills and money like some demonic, destructive suction tube. So I was increasingly compelled to see the war as an enemy of the poor and to attack as such. So in this paragraph, I love his wording, rehabilitation of the poor. You know, poverty is a very destructive thing, and you can have generational poverty. And if you know anything about emergence and psychology and trauma and so on, lots of epigenetic factors are involved in that, but that's a totally different subject. But yeah, none of these wars are for you, my friend. Really not. They don't do anything for you. Here's another quote. Their questions hit home, and I knew that I could never again raise my voice against the violence of the oppressed in the ghettos without having first spoken clearly to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government. For the sake of those boys, for the sake of this government, and for the sake of the hundreds of thousands trembling under our violence, I cannot be silent. So be that as it may, look at the violence, okay? WikiLeaks, Assange, you know, you report on these cover-ups, these lies, these war crimes, and you get the full force, man, the full force of the government on your backside. But this is horrific violence. So yeah, America's a nice place, but come on, can we not stop this? And as I ponder the madness of Vietnam and search within myself for ways to understand and respond in compassion, my mind goes constantly to the people of that peninsula. I speak now not of the soldiers of each side, not of the ideologies of the Liberation Front, not of the junta in Saigon, but simply of the people who have been living under the curse of war for almost 3 continuous decades now. I think of them, too, because it is clear to me that there will be no meaningful solution there until some attempt is made to know them and hear their broken cries, to know them, to know each other, to understand how we suffer together, our common needs and hopes and dreams, to stop finger pointing and scapegoating for God's sake. They were led by Ho Chi Minh, even though they quoted the American Declaration of Independence in their own document of freedom. We refused to recognize them. Instead, we decided to support France in its reconquest of her former colony. Our government felt then that the Vietnamese people were not ready for independence, and we again fell victim to the deadly Western arrogance that has poisoned the international atmosphere for so long. So, meddle, get in there, mess with things because you know better. Because you're doing it for the people there? Are you kidding me? It's all big business. It's all the players mucking about, causing hell on earth. And it's time all of us across the world stood up against this garbage. It can't go on. It is an existential threat to all people on earth, and it is killing things in the world. This whole industrial complex that thinks only of this mortal competition, this ridiculous game theoretic horror show. For 9 years following 1945, we denied the people of Vietnam the right of independence. For 9 years, we vigorously supported the French in their abortive abortive effort to recolonize Vietnam. Okay, they had their reasons, the ideologues, the players. But were they good reasons? Is there any good reason not to let Vietnam sort things out for itself? Oh, communism, oh my God, the Bolsheviks, Stalin, BS. Everything isn't the same everywhere. Different peoples can come up with different solutions to their problems. They don't have to imitate Stalin. Mao Zedong was a problem. He really caused a lot of hell, but he wasn't Stalin, he was Mao. And America couldn't stop it. Did they care? And now we want a war with China over Taiwan, over trade in Asia, to protect the corporations. That's what the Navy's for. And it's a good thing they do. Protect free trade, not just Uncle Sam's corporations. What do the peasants think as we ally ourselves with the landlords and as we refuse to put any action into our many words concerning land reform? What do they think as we test out our latest weapons on them, just as the Germans tested out new machine and new tortures in the concentration camps of Europe? Where are the roots of the independent Vietnam we claim to be building? Is it among these voiceless ones? So after the war, after we've tested all our new weapons, both sides, after we've completely stood in, prolonged the war and allowed Ukraine to get completely wrecked, are we going to go in and do anything for the people of that country? Are we going to help them repatriate? Really? All the Build Back Better people are going to be in there for brand new jobs and tech parks and whatnot. No, it's bullshit. It won't happen. Mark my words. Hanoi remembers how our leaders refused to tell us the truth about the earlier North Vietnamese overtures for peace. How the president claimed that none existed when they had clearly been made. Ho Chi Minh has watched as America has spoken of peace and built up its forces. And now he has surely heard the increasing international rumors of American plans for the invasion of North Vietnam. He knows the bombing and shelling and mining we are doing are part of traditional pre-invasion strategy. Perhaps only his sense of humor and of irony can save him when he hears the most powerful nation of the world speaking of aggression as it drops thousands of pounds of bombs on the poor, weak nation more than 800, rather 8,000 miles away from its shores. Does it sound familiar, people? Afghanistan, Iraq, Central America, and all the other dark adventures that have gone on. Does it sound familiar? He talks about the napalm. Look at all the landmines all over the world. Nobody talks about those anymore. Overtures for peace. I'm not comparing Ho Chi Minh with Putler. I'm not that stupid. But there are ways of dealing with dictators other than going on and destroying their country, killing the poor people, the innocent people of their country. There are other ways to deal with bullies, besides going into the bully's neighborhood and killing everybody. Can you not imagine if we invested in statesmanship, in leadership, in moral and ethical leadership, that we could somehow avoid these things. But no! Profits first, my friends. Profits first. And I'm not talking about Jesus. I'm talking about the money. Nobody wants to piss off money. It could be yours someday. You might win the lottery and everything will change because you'll know what to do with the money and the power when you have it. You'll be a better Elon Musk than Elon Musk could ever have been in his wildest imagination. A better billionaire, trillionaire, oligarch, dictator, king, savior. Of course you would be. You would be better. But no, people. Ethics and morals. This is a social thing. Socialized, you understand? It's between you and other people. And it has to translate across cultures. It has to be understood that it's a human thing, a Homo sapien thing. But we're never going to get it. God, I pray, I hope. Anyway, that speech is well worth reading the whole thing and listening to again and again. And you can listen to all of Martin Luther King's stuff. It's good stuff. And maybe we can learn from him, even though his times were different. Turbulent times, dangerous times, the Weathermen, bombings in America, civil rights, wars on the street, Black Panthers, drugs, hippies. It was rough, man. And today we're heading right back in that direction, and we don't have to. We can stop it, but we have to reach across to one another around the world, to the guy down the street that you disagree with, and establish a relationship with that person. Talk to that person. Understand what common values you share, what common beliefs you share. Learn something about each other's children. When the violence comes, when you're kidnapped, say your name, say your name, say your name. Humanize yourself and humanize the other. Because with this whole moral, ethical, peacemaking thing is a human process between people in community with one another. So maybe Putler shouldn't do business with Germany. It is a huge threat to American hegemony and empire. And something had to be done. There are always good reasons for the shit they do. The deep state, the dark state, whatever. It's not so deep or dark. It's right there in your face. And you can read dozens of books about it. Stand up for one another. Don't stand up for the propagandists on TV. Don't stand up for these people working for these arms, for the arms industry, for the MIC, who pretend to be leaders that represent you. They don't represent you. Stand up, establish relationships, work on them, develop them, build peace. Then we can trade freely. Then we can trade for rare earths and metals and things we're gonna need to build a peaceful world, prosperous world, to meet the challenges of global warming, climate change, and other existential risks that are real. Sure, they're exaggerated sometimes, but they're real. And we need to focus our energy and our talents and our money, our currency signaling processes, that these are important investments, that human health is important, that we should invest in education, in critical thinking. We can't let it all go and go back to magical thinking. Look, the genies are out of the bottle. The technology's there. It's all around us. We take it for granted. It's a big black box. And we're going to need wisdom. We're going to need knowledge and ability to live with it. Trust me. This is what I hope for. Listen to Martin Luther King. So, war racketeers enjoy their racket. And this is another thing I'm going to show you right now. Smedley Butler's War is a Racket. It's about 80 pages long. You can buy it on Amazon, or you can read it, parts of it, most of it, on a PDF. I'll put the links in the description of this video so you can check it out. But this goes way back to the 20s and 30s. He's talking about a racketeer, a gangster for capitalism, and the corporate-driven racket he helped enable almost a century ago by busting heads from the Caribbean to China was small scale indeed compared to today's thoroughly global one. And you know, you've got 800 bases around the world, you've got black sites all over the place, you've got Guantanamo. You're constantly meddling in everybody's business. Uncle Sam is, right? Oh, they have good reasons, and they have great marketing and propaganda and PR to tell you what those reasons are. But in fact, it's just to preserve business. From the very beginning, back to the colonial Portugal or France or Britain, you know, it was the Navy that protected commerce. A lot of legal code has been written over the years to support the high seas, and that book I read about, why we go to war, which I've mentioned before, goes into this, the internationalists, and it's pretty damn good. But now, the United States uses everything in its power to get its way, and it's getting its way for a small number of corporations, not for you, not for the citizens, not for the people who want an education and healthcare and housing. Has nothing to do with you. It's the games that they're playing. So the game A thing, game theory, as opposed to game B, Jim Rutt's thing. This is the big game, the great game. And you don't play it. You don't belong to the club. And if you do, you're never, ever going to want to be out of that club because it's such a nice place. And if you do jump out of the club, it's going to hurt. Anyway, I go on. So the article goes on about that, mentions Chelsea Manning, Daniel Hale, and then talks about the hot Top Gun, fantasy thing. In the military, it's a hotbed of go along to get along conformity. You have to in the military. Otherwise it doesn't work, right? Then he talks about the infamous revolving door between the military and giant weapons makers like Boeing and Raytheon simply won't spin for you. 7-figure compensation packages like the one currently Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin gained from Raytheon after his retirement as Army General won't be an option. And in America, who doesn't want to cash in while gaining more power within the system? So he talks about that, and this guy Lloyd Austin works for the Biden administration now, so he won't be making much money, but he'll gain more power, more access, and then he'll go right back into Raytheon or some other contractor and make tons of money. And the U.S. taxpayer is paying for this stuff. And even if you're not directly paying for it, the government is printing money to pay for it. But they don't print money for you, do they? And then the culture wars is a bunch of BS to keep you believing that it's this minority that's causing the problem. It's scapegoating. or it's the immigrants causing the problem, or the welfare mom causing the problem, or white supremacy causing the problem, or racism causing the problem, whether it's systemic or not. You know, it's just pointing the fingers and scapegoating and creating this ridiculous culture war to keep your eye off the ball so you don't demand anything for yourselves, so that you don't talk to people on the other side, establish a relationship, understand how close you are on most issues and how human you are. Look at each other's families and say, you know, we're different ideologically and politically because I watch Fox and you watch MSNBC, but you know, I kind of get you, and I feel the same way about certain things as you do. And you can start a dialogue and you can do things together, and maybe you'll find that getting together and fighting for something in common is better than fighting each other while you're being robbed, ripped off. Inflation, it's your fault. You're a worker. Your wages are too high, your benefits. Has nothing to do with logistics and supply side things. You know, you don't want to listen to those heterodox economists. So he says quite simply, it pays too much to mouth untruths, less than full truths, or in service to the powerful, right? So he goes on to say that F-35 is an overpriced Ferrari, the B-21 bomber isn't needed, the Sentinel intercontinental ballistic missile, you know, is flawed. I mean, and he says, there, you get rid of those weapons programs and you've saved the U.S. taxpayer $1.5 trillion. And then we get back into the culture problem. Americans don't know what to do with that money because they don't want the other side to get any of it. So they'd rather not have it. They'd rather be cheerleaders for a war in Ukraine that has very little to do with them. It has a lot more to do with Germany cozying up to Russia and pipelines and so on. And if you don't believe that, you're ignorant. You're just unwilling, stubbornly unwilling to read about recent history. Well, go back at least 70 years. It's not about oil. It's not about resources. Well, it's going to be fun to see a multipolar world where resources are kept in one group of allies, you know, business, trading system, and out of another one. And where America's going to have to go to make up for the loss of rare earths, oil and gas, minerals, other things that they could have traded for if they'd wanted to make peace instead of making war. And maybe America gets lucky and destroys Russia and Ukraine, and then they rebuild it back better. They build it back better, and American corporations are in charge of everything. Yippee, all right, finally, freedom and democracy wins. Isn't that great? But has that ever happened? Not since World War II, the Marshall Plan. And you know, MacArthur in Japan. It just doesn't happen because a lot of people just don't want to bend and give over their resources to the U.S. empire. You know, maybe you get Disneyland, you get shopping malls, you get really cool brands. And you can go to McDonald's and drink Coca-Cola, and maybe that's all great. But do you have to kowtow to another country in order to get all that stuff, or can't you just freely trade for it somehow? There's no free trade, people. It's policed trade. What matters above all is keeping America's economy on a permanent wartime footing, both by buying endless new and old weapon systems for the military and selling them globally in a bizarrely Orwellian pursuit of peace through war. So he talks about Ike and Mick again, and the fact that the US government, the Congress, the executive branch, everything is in league with supporting these huge budgets, military budgets. It doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat. It doesn't matter what Trump has to say about useless wars. He's still going to kowtow because it's about the money, the power, the control. So he's saying it's up to us to do something about it, people. And everybody's so mad at people striking in France, civil unrest, when people stand up for themselves, when labor unions try to organize. Oh, those pesky peasants, the plebs, the proles, aren't they just such a big problem? Just leave it to big business, 0 to 1. Leave it to the monopolies. Everything will be sorted out. Just be good. Santa is watching you. Have faith in the system. And he talks about supporting the troops, and of course you support the troops, but the troops get shafted all the time. They come back, no health care, no mental health care, no housing. They have a hard time getting back into the swing of things. A lot of them do. I don't know. I don't think it's the majority of vets, but they have a pretty hard time. Ask a vet. They think they're going to get a good deal, but they don't, unfortunately. So he says military service may be necessary, but it's not necessarily ennobling. So Citizens United is the answer. Good luck with that, like I said above. Not the abortion Citizens United, but the one where people get together and say no to the war machine, where they learn how the war machine works. You got to know the good things about it and the bad things. And he says, yet activists are sometimes ignorant of the most basic facts about their military. So what? Does the difference between a sergeant major and a major, or a chief petty officer and the chief of naval operations matter? The answer is yes. An anti-military approach anchored in ignorance won't resonate with the American people. Well, I'd love to believe that. I'd like to believe that Americans are so switched on, so well educated, so curious, so well read, so well informed, by themselves, by their own efforts, their own sweat equity, their own intellectual expenditures of caloric energy, that they would not countenance ignorance. But I'm not so sure, because it seems like we've been dumbing down for a long time, despite the fact that on social media you can find brilliant young people doing all kinds of great things all the time. I don't know if our IQ's going up, evolving up or down now, but it doesn't seem to be that great at the moment. And the challenges are only going to get more intense as we move forward for various reasons. So he talks about Trump a little bit, and back to the budget again. And he's talking about if we had a budget of $430 billion, it's easily more than China's and Russia's combined, and more than 7 times what this country spends on the State Department. As usual, you get what you pay for, which is, for America, has meant more weapons and disastrous wars. So you don't invest in diplomacy. You invest in weapons systems. You don't even think about diplomacy. You don't think about preventing war. Because the time to prevent the war with Russia in Ukraine would have been before 2010. And by the time you get to 2014, you're already kind of late. And then while you fuel that fire in various ways, you get to where we are today. Now, you've got your reasons, and they've got theirs. And you don't understand the whole picture because you don't bother to educate yourself about it. You've already made up your mind. Putler is bad. Zelensky is good, period, full stop. Let's just leave it there. Good against evil, Marvel Comics, that kind of thing. It's sad, really. Because if we invested more in peacemaking, think about the kind of world we'd be living in now. Then you can talk about free trade and coding the law for modern logistics and, data science and things that enable the efficient use of materials and technologies that can help make a better life for normal people around the world. What the hell is wrong with that? No, it's too sexy to invest in war, isn't it? Well, I wish to God you guys would go out and learn how to fight with a rapier or a machete. And then I wish you'd get busy and do that kind of fighting. I know it takes effort. You could just stand around in a squad or a platoon and get vaporized by a huge gun shell. I saw a recent video. Some guys cleared out some Spetsnaz from a building, and then when they were clearing out the bodies, a shell blew up and injured all of them and killed 2 of them. So the shootout was sexy. It was exciting. They were fragging the building and everything. It was real war. But at the end of the day, they're torn to bits, and 2 of their comrades are dead, not to mention the Spetsnaz crew that's all KIA. Oh, that's so exciting. Go watch Band of Brothers over and over and over again. Apocalypse Now again and again and again. Have fun. But this is for real, people. And the UK is now realizing that Ukrainian refugees are racists. They get there and they're like, why are there so many brown people and Muslim people and Chinese people in this neighborhood? I don't feel safe here. I read an article about that the other day. Well, they come from a more insular culture. They don't have those kind of cosmopolitan populations in Ukraine. You can't blame them for it. But it is a challenge for them to be in that kind of world. So if you want to close off all the nation states and make them pure ethnic nation states or whatever, you can try, but it's not going to work. It might work in 50 years after, climate change has screwed with us for a long, long time. Competition for resources and food becomes more intense. There's refugees all over the place and migrants. You don't think this is going to happen? You don't want to know? That's fine. Stay focused on whatever you're doing. It's all right. But circumstances will dictate what happens, and then you're going to have to react to it one way or another. So he goes with the America First thing, and more about the budget, and he concludes, well, the last 3 paragraphs are pretty good. I want you to go and read this article. So he says, currently Americans are giving the Pentagon all at once, plus some. And how's that been working out for the rest of us? Isn't it finally time for us to exercise real oversight, as Ike challenged us to do in 1961? Isn't it time to force the Pentagon to pass an audit each year? It's failed the last 5. Or else cut its budget even more deeply? Isn't it time to hold Congress truly responsible for enabling ever more war by voting out military sycophants? Isn't it time to recognize, as America's founders did, that sustaining a vast military establishment constitutes the slow and certain death of democracy? Now, I don't think the American founders were all saints, or that the Constitution is holier than the Bible or whatever. But, these people in the past thought things through. And they were pretty smart folks. And they saw these dangers. And we can learn from our forefathers something or another. Even if we feel we have to wash it through our messed up culture wars ideologies. To interpret the thing to match our narrow-minded view of the world that we got from some other place and pare it out into the universe because we think it makes us part of an exclusive club, a certain more righteous tribe, if you will. And then he concludes, just remember one thing, the military-industrial complex won't reform itself. It just might have no choice, however, but to respond to our demands if we as citizens remain alert, knowledgeable, determined, and united. And if it should refuse to, if the Mick can't be tamed, whether because of its strength or our weaknesses, you will know beyond doubt that this country has truly lost its way. So what is it? Freedom and democracy. I always say flee dumb and democracy now, because it's clear to me that those terms don't mean anything anymore, and that they're just being used by various players in a propagandistic kind of way to keep your eye off of what's really going on, so that you don't know how to stand up for what's right. And it's damn sad, people. Damn sad. Thanks for listening. Comment, please. Click like. Just help me a little bit. Maybe I'll find somebody out there who likes my commentaries. Maybe not. But I enjoy doing this, and I'm glad you stopped by. I appreciate it. William T. Out.